Economic news now, and the foreign direct investment FDI in South Africa dropped by nearly 40% in 2020. This could be attributed to a number of factors. Now, will President Cyril Ramaphosa's January 8, the NEC's January 8 renewal talk help rebuild investor confidence? Well, let's bring into the conversation Sifiso Skenjana, who is Chief Economist for IQ Business. Sifiso, good to see you once again in 2022. Let's start with what happened over the weekend, the delivery of the January 8 statement, right? It's not a statement of policy of government, but it is a signal of where those who have been mandated to carry out ANC policies in government are supposed to take that policy in the year ahead. So from what you heard from the ANC National Executive Committee's statement about various aspects, such as, rooting out corruption, acting on the Zondo Commission's report, etc., do you believe this will be enough to, stoke the fires once again of foreign direct investment?
Thanks, Tulez. I think it's certainly not going to be enough, but I think it's an important starting point. One of the things that we tend to look at as a measure of the kinds of things that drive particularly FDI is what we call quality of institutions. And so that speaks to issues of rule of law, speaks to the protection of property rights, it speaks to a whole lot of number of things, it speaks to the ease of doing business, and contract enforcement and all of those things. And these are the things that are critical, in the functioning of a state. And so when you look at some of those pronouncements, they are talking in lieu or in pursuit, particularly of strengthening the quality of our institutions. We've heard already from SARS that they've even increased their investment in ICT, they've increased their investment in new divisions for tax collection. These are some of the things that talk about strengthening of institutions. So I think it is a starting point, and I think it'll certainly start to signal intentionality as well around ensuring that there's a solid base from which investments then can be realized.
So what would have made that statement to be something of, a catalyst for a running start as opposed to perhaps a crawling start or a walking start, a running start? What needed to be there in the context of the challenges we faced last year? And to say challenges perhaps is an understatement, Sifiso, given what we faced with the outages, the power outages we faced and the unrest in July, unrest also being a euphemism for chaos that happened in July.
I mean, I think also, when you just take a bit of a step back and you look at are in place today. So I think it's really around now making sure we're putting the building blocks back to where they need to be, strengthening the foundation for investment to ultimately come back into the country.
Lastly, Sifiso, how much do you believe, investors, particularly foreign investors, how much attention do you believe they are paying to issues of political stability as well as our security situation? If you perhaps think that what happened in July last year, was a bit of a scare that perhaps signaled that, we may be on a stable footing, but we can slip up at any moment, given some of the dynamics that are at play in our country, political dynamics, but also socio-economic dynamics that perhaps mean that our footing can be challenged at any moment. Taking that and separating it from the conversations we keep having about about policy certainty, etc., and the ease of doing business, just political and security concerns and considerations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a statement that came out of Fitch, and that's the ratings agency, and they were talking about the variables that they're looking at in our country that they're currently observing to see if at least they can, monitor our rating upward or downward. One of the things they mentioned there was the social risk that was embedded in the system, and that they were seeing a heightened risk of social unrest. And so I think certainly that's one of the things that become particularly of interest even to them. And that's the one lens I think we can look at that, is that because then that's got multiple effects. The second is that when you see domestic investment often becomes a leading indicator for FDI. And so when organizations internally in our country are struggling to figure out or struggling to commit for their investments because of security issues or because of the risk of further unrest, you're seeing it in the shift in unemployment as well, where a lot of more people now are going into part-time employment or being employed as part-time workers because firms aren't making those investment choices. And when domestic firms aren't making those choices, you are unlikely to see foreign firms making those investment choices. And so the security issue that you really mentioned becomes so critical, not only in how external or foreign investors look at us, but how also the environment created within can be a leading indicator in terms of how we can attract external investment. And I think it's certainly one of the big risks. One of the points that I want to quickly make to us is that when you've got a history of rioting and unrest, the studies show that it's likely to continue coming back. And so I think what's going to be critical from a government point of view is firstly say, how do we proactively and preemptively manage the social risks that become embedded in our system? And how do we make sure that if that outbreak does take place, how does it become contained? And I think those are the two things we didn't solve correctly with the KZN and Gauteng challenge when those riots came. And I think now is an opportunity for us to think more structurally around that.
Yeah, because, I mean, the socio-economic hotbed and what we've described as a ticking time bomb has been there for a while. But if we are now in the arena in which, and in the region where we are now worried about national security, as you know, my sense certainly is that there's a subtle conversation that is about national security. It's not loud yet, but you can see that there's some conversation happening that has to do with national security. Then you're dealing with a completely different ballgame altogether in as far as the economy is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what we call strategic assets in any economic structure, your airspace is one of them, your defense is one of them, your intelligence is one of them. And these are some of the things that we can't allow ourselves to see them denigrate, because it really starts to open up, I think, space for insurgencies as well from other opportunist groups. We've seen now in South Africa, issues of Boko Haram, particularly looking for opportunities to be here. We've seen some, Islamist extremists also starting to look for opportunities. So South Africa is actually starting to become an interesting target because of our lack of investment or lack of strengthening of particularly those strategic assets. And that also becomes a very big risk for the sustainability of our economy, for the sustainability of the investment that we want to see as well. And so very critical, not only from a political point of view, but particularly from a long-term economic, socio-economic development point of view.
All right, Sifiso Skenjana, thank you for your insights. I believe we'll continue to have these kinds of conversation ahead of the State of the Nation address, as well as the budget 2022. He is Chief Economist at IQ Business. Hopefully, we don't get to see the worst case scenario, certainly around that security situation. But yeah, I mean, you've heard all sorts of words. There was a document released a few days ago that talked about counter-revolution. There was the insurrection debate that happened last year, with the president calling it a failed insurrection, and some of the people in his circle saying no, it wasn't. It has elements of counter-insurgents, counter-revolution, etc., etc. And over the last few days, certainly in Polokwane, in Limpopo, in the build-up to the January 8th statement of the ANC, you did see that there's some concern about security that no one is spelling out in exact details. If you factor in some of what we've seen, the events in Parliament, the fire that happened there, something is going on, South Africa. And the sooner we have an honest conversation, the better. And we must be tuned in as well. Let's not be hoodwinked by some of what the politicians will tell us from time to time.